I said, Alvin Josephy gets smarter every day. I used to walk into bookstores with him, and he'd look for where his books were. And he'd say, oh, there they are with the insects and dinosaurs. Indians don't have history, you know, they've got anthropology. And, you know, if you look in bookstores still, the history section is not, there's maybe a separate Indian section, but the history section does not have biographies of Indians or histories of Indians. Another interesting story is when he first wrote about Nez Perce, he wrote about Joseph, and somebody asked him to, it was a very popular article in American Heritage magazine in the 50s. And so Viking Press came and said, we want more. So he wrote a book about, he chose 5 or 6 other Indians, well-known Indians, to come and fill up. Anyway, and he wrote a thing called, which he called Patriot Chiefs. And Indians would tell him over the years that it was the first time they'd heard anybody call them patriots. We were patriots. We were fighting for our land. They're still coming, Alan. I got to keep talking.
It's not 7 yet.
Anyway, so Alvin, he found the Nez Perce story when he was working for Time magazine in the 50s. He took time out to write the Patriot Chiefs. He still was working for Time, and he finished the Patriot Chiefs, and then he switched over to American Heritage Publishing Company, where he worked for several more years, and he continued to work there as he wrote then the big book, the big Nez Perce book, and there's a copy of it there, called The Nez Perce and the Opening of the Northwest, came out in 1965. In 1968, the Indian Heritage of America, which was a finalist for a National Book Award, and the New York Times said there's more information on Indians in this book than there is in most libraries in America right now. And that was in 1967, 68. He went on to write other books, and he also was the first person who kind of linked Indian concerns and environmental concerns. So Jamie is what, your cousin? Nephew. Alan's nephew, Jamie Pinkham, was the incoming executive director of the Columbia River Intel. Okay. He gave a talk here, and he said Alvin Josephy caught things as issues of Indian sovereignty were coming up and environmental concerns were coming up. And he was the person that kind of met them in the middle. So for a long time, he wrote things for Audubon magazine. He wrote about the devastation in the Four Corners in the Southwest. He wrote, believe it or not, about Dakotas he called it, he had a great deal for naming. He called the Dr. Strangelove Builds a Canal, about the garrison project in the Dakotas. So anyway, Alvin, during the course of his work on the Nez Perce, he bought a place here in 1964, and I had a bookstore here. I opened it in 1976, and he used to, when he came from the East Coast, he'd always come to the bookstore. His wife would drop him off and say, take care of him, Rich, for a couple hours, would you? So I can go visit my friend. Anyway, we became friends, and then he helped me start Fish Trap, which is a nonprofit involving writers, and is now the executive director of Fish Trap that she just bought. And then on his passing, his papers he sent to the University of Oregon continuously. On his passing, he wanted to leave all of his books here somewhere in town, so we were talking about it. And finally, he was very ill, and I went back and visited him, and he said, well, the books are the girls' business now. So when he passed away, his daughter emailed me and said, come on April 23rd and get your books. So I went to Greenwich, and the Museum of the American Indian had already been there. And so we kind of split books, and that's what's upstairs. Bob, can we start now?
It's rolling.
Get rolling.
There are 4 more chairs. If somebody is looking for a place to sit, there are chairs right here, and there's one also up front. And one over here. Yeah. So if anybody's on the stairs and they want to sit, there are places. And I'm sorry, I did turn the air conditioning so that it'll be cooler air. I apologize. It's getting a little hot. But then again, I'm running around in chairs.
So we have at the Josephy Center for the last few years tried to, in one way or another, honor Ellen's work and honor our Nez Perce neighbors especially, and the people who, of course, once lived here. And we've also worked with the Umatilla and Crow Shadow Institute there, and we've hosted various kinds of art shows and exhibits. In fact, 2 years ago, we hosted an exhibit put together by the Nez Perce National Historical Park. We said, what are we going to do this year? I had always wanted, when people come in here, they want to know who lived here and how they lived. That's what people want to know, whether it's school kids or older people. And so I wanted to do something like that, and I got in touch with the Nez Perce Park and the University of Idaho. They sent a bunch of photographs, and the Park Service sent over some artifacts. And I called it The Way They Lived, because these pictures were all, of course, taken by white guys. And I'm a white guy. And I, with some trumps, and I wrote the narrative here, trying to figure out, you know. So I wrote The Way They Lived, from the best, trying to be as honest as possible, but still from my perspective. So I thought that we needed a major corrective for that kind of thing. And so I called my friend Alan Pinkham, who's a Nez Perce elder, who has been, I think, at every office on the Nez Perce tribe at one time or another, is the author of Salmon, co-author of Salmon and His People, a story about the biology and the mythology of salmon, which is unfortunately out of print. And then Lewis and Clark Among the Nez Perce, which he did with Steve Evans, a historian who lives at Lapwood. Alan lives in Lenore, Idaho. And he has, I said, geez, every one of your kids, he's got a new kid here tonight, Tim, is, yeah, up there, he's one I hadn't met. And I said, every one of your kids is an artist. And he said, well, their grandfather took them to powwows and grandparents, so it's this tradition passed down. Alan's another son, Alan Jr., is going to come later in the summer and start carving he colored that little toy canoe on the other side, and he's going to carve a regular size, 30-foot dugout. And that is the story of, again, he taught a meeting workshop here 3 years ago, and at the end of it he said, Rich, you know, we were canoe people before we were horse people, and even after we were horse people. I'd like to come back here and carve a canoe. So we've been trying to do that for a couple of years now, trying to put that all together. Anyway, Alan has a tremendous memory and tremendous, he's kind of had a foot in both worlds too, because he's done the reading as well as the listening to oral history and the participation in ceremony and books. And although this exhibit even started out as how they lived, or yeah, what it ended up being, I think, is a story of continuity from past to present, and how art and artifacts and ceremony and everything and culture have made it possible for the Nez Perce to survive and thrive. And now I've talked enough, so please, please welcome Alan Pinkham.
Does she want to sit down?
It's kind of hard to start at the beginning here because there's been so many changes within the tribe, you know, from 300 and 400 years ago. And you can see the changes here. And the changes are not only cultural, but political. Because in practicing our culture, we had to get involved in the political process as well. Joseph, in 1879, went to Washington, D.C. to plead the cause of his people. He had to get involved in politics to do that. But at the same time, he wished to hold on to his own way of worship. Well, Luxor, that's what we called it. But being bombarded by Christianity and those that carried the word of the Bible, Joseph even objected to that. And he withdrew from the Christian teaching. And so there is also involved the religious process of politics, religion, and culture. So the division within the tribal membership of the Nez Perce caused a split within the tribal organization. One said, let's take up the ways of the white man and become Christian. Maybe they'll treat us better. And others said, no, we are ourselves. We should live the way we have for the last generations beyond. So that the tribe split. And that came about in 1877. And of course, some of you know the tribal history, but there were some of us that said, no, we don't want to move to the reservation in Idaho from here, from the Wallowa. And there was even a great battle among the settlers here of whose property was whose. Joseph went out and put some stakes in the ground over here by the river, Wallowa River, and said, this is where I live on this side. You can live on that side. That's what he told the first settlers. But the political process was so great and the pressure to change and acquire land was much greater than what Joseph and his people could do to withstand what was occurring. Simply by the numbers. The numbers that opposed him was much greater than our people here in the Rio. So we knew that. We even knew that way back in probably 1700s. Because in the 1700s we acquired the horse. And I kind of object to the Haynes definition of calling our horses started in 1730. I think it was probably more closer to 1700. Because the trade pattern between tribes, even to the southwest of us, was very fast. And the other thing that kind of drove us towards the horse was that when we would travel, this person traveled east, west, north, and south, readily. So did other tribes, without the horse. We walked to the plains to hunt buffalo. We walked to the east coast, and the Great Lakes areas, maybe even beyond. We went to the southwest. But then when we acquired the horse, we could travel greater distances in shorter times with more baggage. So it wasn't uncommon for us to travel to the Great Lakes or to the southwest. There is a story of an Nez Perce man. He was named Sena. And the closest I can figure the time period that he did this was shortly after 1795 and maybe prior to about 1830, somewhere in this time period, when the first trappers and traders started coming out. And this story tells that Hakatsina called the people together and he said to the people, I'm going to go see where the sun comes up. Well, how far is that? You know, even then we knew the world was round. You know, other people said, well, you don't know whether the world is round or not. Well, the moon is round, the sun is round, so the earth must be round. And then when you look at the terrain at a prairie, or even if you get when you go to the ocean, it curves away. So that was our answer. The world is round. We knew that. So Hahatsina goes east. He crosses the Bitterroots and goes into Missouri, goes down to Missouri, and ends up. Of course, he sees different tribes along the way. Well, how can you travel through different tribal areas without getting killed? Or some hostility is always there within other people. Well, you need this diplomatic skill to go outside your tribal area. So he must have had that kind of skill, or at least the knowledge of, for him to travel down the Missouri and end up at a place called Cincinnati. So sometime after 1795, that's when Hahatsina was in Cincinnati. Well, he stays there for a period of time, sees some of these strange creatures that we heard about. We had never seen this strange creature. We've had it described to us, but we never seen it. And the early description of this strange creature was it'll speak a language we never heard before. It'll be pale of skin. They'll have eyes like fish. Some of them will have their faces on upside down. And they smell. That was our first description. Before we even seen this strange creature. We called it Hanat because Hanat means creature. And since we didn't know what it was, so we ended up calling it Hanat. Well, as we got to know more and more about this creature, we said, well, maybe it has some human traits, which it did. And so as you learn more and more of it, we found out well, there's tens upon tens of thousands of these strange people east of the Mississippi. We knew that, even before Lewis and Clark shows up. And of course, we had the horse for over 100 years when Lewis and Clark shows up. And we had vast herds of horses at the time of Lewis and Clark. So we became expert horsemen. So how did we learn about this animal? Well, we would ask questions about this if we first saw one. What good is this animal? What is it? Is it like the dog? What does it eat? Can it be trained like the dog? And what's the use of it? So those are the kinds of questions. And we would have learned that this animal was brought across the ocean by these strange creatures. And as we knew more and as we traveled more, and of course when we got the horse and was able to utilize it, we traveled greater distances. And we would have went down to the southwest, and we did. Down there we found another kind of human being. Once we decided that this strange creature must be a human being or it's mixed with another kind of animal. Well, we finally learned more. Well, maybe it is a human being because it can do much more than we can do. But acquiring the knowledge of the horse and going down to the southwest, we found another people that wore hats and lived in blankets, and they called themselves Spanish. And if we would have gone there and asked these Spanish people, how do you utilize this animal and what is the best use of it and how can we make use of it or train it? And if the first in contact with these Spanish people was well, then we probably would have learned very quickly how to utilize this animal. But the other way we would have utilized the animal and gain knowledge, we would have captured one of them, or a Mexican that knew horsemanship, and which we did. There's another little story of us trading a Mexican between our tribal people, because he was a horseman and he had horse knowledge. So he would have taught us much more. I can't identify what date this was that we acquired this Mexican slave, but there is a story that tells us that. And so this is part of this great change that we started talking about, represented by these pictures as well. And so we knew this great change was coming, because we knew that tens upon tens of thousands of these, once we decided they were human, these human beings are decimating the eastern tribes. And we knew that also, because these eastern tribal people became mixed with the French very readily. And they would have came out here probably about the same time as the horse. So we'd have learned much more things from what was going on the East Coast and the tribal people there. And what we would do, the Eastern tribal people had scars from the epidemic, smallpox, and we called them with scars people. So that's how we identified the Eastern tribal people, the Iroquois and Shawnees and Pequots and Mayan or wherever they were. So, so we would have learned a great deal from the mixed blood French Indian. And I suspect also other Eastern tribes would have came out here readily too, because West Coast tribes went to the East Coast tribes went to the West Coast. Now there was a judge in about the 1850s. He was a judge in Pomeroy, probably the Washington Territory. And later he would meet these Palouse Nez Perce coming and going through Pomeroy. And maybe some of the wild bands would go down that way as well. So he got curious. He started asking these Palouse and these Wallowa people, where do you travel to? And I and Steve Evans went to Pomeroy, and they had a little library there that had some archival stuff from Judge Kuykendall. And we got hold of his notes, and it said, yeah, I interviewed so-and-so Nez Perce, and he said that, yeah, we traveled to the Great Lakes. So that verifies that we traveled. So I heard this from my father, of course. He said, my father told me, well, we traveled to the Great Lake to the north. And we traveled to the Great Lakes and, Lake Superior and those lakes, and after red pipestone for pipes. And we traded for those items there with the tribal people and those red pipestone quarries. And we also probably would have went to the East Coast, like Center. He didn't quite go all the way, but he went to Cincinnati, which over another few hundred miles he would have been on the East Coast. But nonetheless, it just tells me that what my father was telling me, Judge Kuykendall also verified. And it's not only the Nez Perce, it's other tribes that did the same thing. I had a friend that I worked with on the museum board, and I got curious. So I asked him, what did your Navajo people do before you acquired the horse? Where did you travel to? He said, oh, we sent letters to the East Coast to find out what's going on. Well, we did the same thing. There was a Nez Perce he was a runner before we acquired the horse. And he would run from the Snake River or the Clearwater River, and he'd go west. And he'd run by this large mountain with the snow on top of it. And he would run by that, and he'd go visit the Nisquallies and other Puget Sound tribes, and he would gather news of what's going on. And he'd come back. So that was way before we got to horse. So that verifies what my father told me. You know, he told me this little story in Kuykendall also. So those are kinds of things. These are great changes that are coming. You know, look at this, what we call a tuches, the digging stick for digging iron. It's a tuches. Well, at first we made it from elk horn and a wood cross piece, of course. But then when we acquired metal, we understood that, well, gee, metal, you can form it, change it, you know, implement it. And it becomes a very useful tool. You know, a knife or an axe or a tuches. And so this is part of the change that we're talking about. So we acquired metal. Because we knew Lewis and Clark had metal, and he had gunpowder and lead ball and muzzle loaders. The curious thing that I found out when we put our book together is that the Nez Perce in 1805 had 3 muzzle loaders before Lewis and Clark shows up. But we had no ball or lead or powder. We just had the musket. So how do you acquire lead and powder to make that weapon useful again? So we decided not to kill Lewis and Clark. We decided, well, maybe we'll get more powder and lead from these guys, and which we did. And so those are the kinds of things that we had to make decisions on. You know, should we kill these guys or not to acquire what they had? Well, because Lewis and Clark had all this material, we didn't kill them. But the argument that was last convincing segment of it, Wat Cooey's, you know, described what she had gone through. She was captive and then taken in by a white man. The white man wanted to go back to Europe, and Wat Cooey says, no, I'm not going with you. And so she started coming back west, and he went to Europe. Well, she comes back and she says, I was treated well by this white man. Don't kill Lewis and Clark. So that was kind of the winning argument of that situation. But the other thing was this metal. And they also had glass, you know, the glass beads, and other little trade items, and cloth. And so those are the reasons that we didn't kill them. Now, knowing that they have useful material, how can we acquire these things without having to go to war? Even at that time, at Lewis and Clark, we knew if we killed Lewis and Clark, more would show up anyway. Because that's what's happened to the Eastern tribes. And you kill one, 10 more show up. So we knew this argument. But the curious thing is this, if you look at the tuches, that is technology, which we didn't have. Because the technology, we didn't know how to make metal. And we didn't know how to make glass. We didn't know how to make gunpowder. So to acquire these things should be hopefully by trade. And so that's another reason we readily accepted Lewis and Clark, even knowing what happened to the Eastern tribes. But this technology idea went out more because we knew that it would help our people at a greater pace than anything else. Now, the other curious thing that we recognize is that if these strange people have this technology, how can we also gain that technology? Well, we noticed that Lewis and Clark wrote in their journals. They'd do that, and we'd watch them. And then they would pass it to somebody else, and they would read the same words. Well, that's a technology or educational process teaching others by writing on paper. Well, how do you acquire that expertise? You have to learn it. So some of it later on, and when we met more choppers and traders, they described how they learned to read and write. And so we sent, in the 1830s, we sent young boys to Canada, Red River. But then the missionaries got a hold of this and said, oh, you're starving for religion. You're unenlightened, you're unchristian, you're savage. You need to pick up this religion that will teach you a better way of life. Well, my father always told me, we weren't looking for the Bible, we were looking what went into the Bible. And how do you read those words? It was a form of technology and advancement to us. It was progression. So, in reality, this is why we did those things. We also sent a number of Nez Perce to St. Louis a few years later. But there was two missions to what these Nez Perces wanted to accomplish. They wanted to look for William Clark, but they also wanted to learn how to read and write. Well, the missionaries getting a hold of this said, no way, these savages must be looking for religion and the book. The words of my father, it wasn't. We're looking for the process of reading and writing. Now, even my own people believe that we went looking for the Bible, because some of them were raised that way. They're raised as Christians. I'm not questioning their ability to do that, because that's a freedom of choice. But all I wanted my own people to recognize there's another aspect of why we went looking for the book. Now, when these Nez Perce got to St. Louis, all they could do is do it with sign language. They would say, we're looking for the leader, William Clark. Well, William Clark wasn't there at the time, so trying to converse with the residents of St. Louis, we would do sign language. And of course, the sign for the book is this. And some of the people said, well, they're looking for the Bible. Well, the missionaries got a hold of this, and then Parker and Spalding and Whitman came out. Told us that, yeah, you're hungering for Christianity, so you got to do this, this, and this, and this is the way you should live. But in reality, some of our people accepted it, which is fine. Others said, no, we have our own way of life. We can teach our children to be good and well and survive in this world just as well if we read the book. So there was a difference, and that's what split our tribe, which ultimately came about to the War of 1877. But that's another long story. But another thing, I'm going to try to get off of this other stuff here, but look at the picture here of this lady with the chemist in front of her. They're almost the size of your fist. We don't see chemists that size anymore. This is in, the one on the upper right, or upper left there, is in Muscle Shell Meadows, which is up along the Lolo Creek. And it's a famous meadow, General Howard went through there, and some other explorers, Wilson Clark also. And in that meadow, it's about, 60-acre meadow or so, and the water conditions are such that the chemists grow there very prolifically. But the chemist to grow to that size needs ground disturbance. You turn over the soil when you dig out a chemistry. And So for a long time, there were cattle grazing in that meadow. There was a sawmill just up to the left there. There's two ladies. And I used to go there with my aunts and my mothers and fathers. We would go to that meadow. In fact, where we camped was just above the head of the lady on the left, you know, just in the timberline there, just above her head. That's where we used to camp. And in that time period, cattle were out in the meadow, and the sawmill was operating just above the meadow a little ways. And I can remember my mother going out and digging among the cow pies out in the meadow. And in those days, this is in the 1940s, and the chemist was fairly large, not as big as that one in the photo there, but maybe about half that size. So even by 1940, the size of the chemist was being reduced because it wasn't getting the right ground disturbance. And if you look at the pile of chemists, that's bushels and bushels of chemists. Because of the limitation of the cattle grazing, and then only our numbers of diggers of chemists was reduced also. Because they would, if they had a job, they could go and buy groceries at the grocery store. But others, especially during the Depression of the 1930s, they relied on camel's root and cow's roots and other roots that we ate. The Depression didn't bother them at all, because they were still living that way. I can remember my father, we had a neighbor who was a white man and wife there with 3 or 4 kids, about the same age as we were. And that farmer would come to Dad and says, "Can you loan me $5? Because in those days, $5 went a long ways. So he said, yeah, I happen to have $5, so he loaned the neighbor $5. Well, our neighbor survived the Depression that way. And of course, my father would get back and trade labor. You know, you could come up and help us thrash or, you know, plant, you know, help us seed. So there was a trade-off with our neighbor there. So we got along well. And one of my oldest brothers went in with our older brother into World War II with our neighbor. So that's how close we were to this family. They were a white family. They treated us well, and we treated them well. We got along pretty good. And so this great change has come. Now when you go to Mussel Shell Meadows right now, this summer, you'd be hard-pressed to find any chemist bigger than your thumb. Now the reason for that is because we have invasive weeds in the meadow, because the cattle were there for probably 80 years in that meadow. And nest perch were reduced in numbers in digging the chemist and wasn't giving it that ground disturbance that it needed for better growth. The invasive weeds is terrific in that meadow now. It's just, the roots are just intermatted with the chemist root. It's very hard to dig. We can't even use the tucus because the tucus cannot get into that turf to get the chemist root out like we did in the old days. So now we got a problem. Now the Forest Service has let us go back into that meadow for exclusive use of chemists. That's one good thing the Forest Service did for us. They put a fence around and excluded all cattle and all other activities on that meadow. So now they said, well, nest perches come back and you can practice your chemistry. We thought it was great. But the conditions for the best chemist does not exist. And I have a young lady. I met her about 3 years ago. Her name is Marcy Carter. She's a nest person. She's working on her PhD to rehab that meadow. So this is the great change I'm talking about. To being the beginning of agrarian practices to a science-based rehab of chemists. Would you call that a little bit of progress? I think it is. it's a tremendous effort. And she's a young lady. Her family dug in that meadow for generations, as well as my family. So now she's studying these agrarian practices and trying to come up with some options for eradicating the invasive weeds and to restore the upper meadow, because the upper meadow doesn't have the conditions of the lower meadow that proliferates camas growth. The lower meadow is prolific for camas, but it grows in small numbers and encased in this invasive weed turf. So it's not the best ideal situation. The upper meadow is devoid, almost devoid of camas, and the camas is the size of your little finger, because the water's condition isn't the same as the lower portion of the meadow. And we recognize that. So those are the kinds of things she has to some way restore that meadow to where it produces camas of this lower picture on the right. And we're using science to do that. You know, so this is what my people were thinking of, this technology that these strange people were bringing. Well, we're applying it today yet. You know, so I think it's a great thing. Now, the world isn't perfect, of course, but hopefully we're getting there. It's a little bit better than it was about 40 and 50 years ago. Because the cattle were in the meadow, 50 years ago, and the sawmill was operating, and the creek that goes through there wasn't flowing in its natural state because the mill had it dammed up for a holding pond for the logs. So, but as things are changing, and hopefully we'll be able to get that rehab done in the next few years. The biggest problem is how do you eradicate invasive weeds? We don't want to spray it because of the chemicals. So the next option is labor intensive. You go out and pull the weeds. So if you look at that meadow with 60, 70 acres of weeds and roots, that's a lot of work. But nonetheless, that's what we're going to do. Maybe one day we'll have to do that, to actually pull the weeds. But,
could I ask a question?
yeah.
You didn't have a compass, you didn't have a clock, you didn't have, how did you find your way? How did you count? How did you know many from few? Did you have numbers? How did that part work?
That's a good question. How do you tell time, and how do you find directions and track? Simple. Do you know where the North Star is? There's a story. It's called Two Grizzly Bears and White Wolf, 5 wolf brothers and 1 little dog. I'll have to make this kind of short because it's kind of a long story. But I'll try and give you the idea of why this story is important. And old Wolf was sitting down on the ground. He had 4 brothers, oldest to the youngest. And he was looking up at the sky. And Coyote comes along and says, "What are you looking at?" He says, "Oh, I'm looking at the 2 grizzly bears up there. Don't you see them?" And Coyote looks up. "Oh, you mean those 2 right there?" I said, "Yeah." Old Wolf, he says, "Yes." Well, Old Wolf said, "I sure wish I could go up there and see these 2 grizzly bears." So Coyote, he shoots, he makes arrows in a bow, and he shoots the first arrow, it sticks up in the sky, and he shoots the second, and it sticks to the first and the third and fourth, and comes all the way down to the ground. And says, "Now, Old Wolf, you go up this arrow ladder." But the next oldest brother says, "I want to go up first with my next youngest brother." So he goes up the ladder first with his next youngest brother. And he goes up the ladder, and he goes down and sits across from the 2 grizzly bears. And then the other wolf brothers say, "Well, I want to go up too," the next youngest one. And then But he says, I want to take my little dog with me. Then the youngest brother says, I'll come behind you. And they go up the arrowway. And they sit down and look across to the two grizzly bears. They become the handle of the dipper. And that one little dog, you remember that little star next to on the handle? There's a little star right next to the handle. That's the little dog. So when you hear this as a child, the two grizzly bear lines up with the North Star. And then when the Big Dipper rotates, you know, when it is during the months time during the year it rotates, it gives you the 4 seasons. Each position tells us a new season of the year. And as it goes around, it creates a full cycle. Well, it's 2 grizzly bears, 5 wolf brothers, and 1 little dog. And outside of the cup is the 2 grizzly bears, and they point to the North Star. So if you're traveling in the world somewhere, all you have to do is look for the 2 grizzly bears, and you know where you're at. And then time-wise, we would use the term 1 day's travel. Of course, the length of the day varies with the length of the season. But you can travel only so far in 1 day's travel if you travel by foot. You know, you might be able to go 20, 25, 30 if you're pretty lucky in even terrain. So the day's travel is counted in that distance that you go. It may be defined as 20 to 30 miles, depending on the territory. And then you would say, well, I don't want to go that 1 day's travel. I'll travel for half a day or part of a day. Or if you, anything less than a fraction of a day, it becomes paces. You know, how many steps do I need to go? And you'd say 400 steps. And this is, you will end up by where you're described to go. So that's the kind of thing. Time-wise is by daylight or night time. And the day is just fractionated up. And of course now we got a wristwatch. You say, oh, it's 20 minutes to 8. Well, we never had the concept of minutes and hours, but we had fractions of a day, or the time, or the number of steps going someplace. So that's how we did it. And of course, what these seasons tells us, we also broke down into roughly a month's period. You know, when spring salmon show up, that's probably March and April, in that little time period. Then when a blueback show up, that's probably in July. You know, and then when, another month would be Kikit. Kikit can show up in the last part of February and March. So when these roots mature and able to be dug, that also tells us a timeline. You know, when the roots first come in, when the first salmon comes in, then the later runs of salmon, and on and like that until fall. And when you get into the first snow, and you know, or the habitat starts to change in color, oranges and blues and so forth. So those are kinds of timelines for the year that we can, and it comes out to about 12 months. So it's close to similar to what we have as a calendar now. So, so that's how we would define time. And of course, the other way we define time is by the life of a human being. My father used to tell me, he says, one generation is about 1/3 of 100 years. And other tribes might describe, well, one of the first young girls was able to bear children, which made 16, 17 years old. That's a generation to them. But my father would describe to me what a generation for us would be when 2 couples have children, you know, from a little toddler to maybe 8 or 9 years old, the parents are usually about 30 to 33 years old. So that's one generation. And it's family unit orientated is one generation. So that's what he used to describe to me. And then another, if we would talk about ancient times, it's beyond that time of generations that we cannot count. So we know it's pretty far back or pretty far in the future. And another way would be is to describe ancient times is we'd call them legend times. Maybe times before humans, or times before the little animals people. We knew that there were large animal people and small animal people that you see today. Well, what happened to the big animal people? The elephants and mammoths and dinosaurs and so forth. We knew they existed. Well, how did we know they existed? We knew they existed because we found bones of these large animals. There's even bones, I was just there yesterday, Total Lake up by Grangeville. They dug 2 mammoths out of that lake about, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. And then I asked the archaeologist who dug them up, and he was there observing, did you find any Nez Perce arrows in those mammoths? He said, no, I didn't. So, darn it. So we couldn't prove that we hunted that. But we knew that these kinds of animals existed because we found those bones. We'd find them out from Lewiston, you go towards Pasco, you'd find these washes that were washed out going across that flat area towards Pasco. Well, that's where my dad told me this is where we found those bones. And so we knew they existed, but we didn't know what they looked like. You know, we may found fragments of skulls and, you know, other bones, but we couldn't visualize what that animal looked like. So we just called them these ancient animals, the big animal people. We knew that they existed, but you don't see them today. Well, we got a landmark down in by, it's called Hathaway Creek. It's just upriver on the Clearwater from Lewiston, about 3 or 4 miles, not very far. And there's a large curve on the ridge line, and up on the ridge line there's stone formations. They look like elephants or dinosaurs sitting down. They're tall, like as tall as this building. You know, 20, 30, 35 feet high. Well, they look like these backs of animals. So they said, well, this must be the creation place. And there was this great change that came that wiped out the large animal people, and those animal people that we see today are the survivors of this great event that occurred generations beyond our memory. But we see the stone formations, and we found the bones. So we put 2 and 2 together and said, oh, this is a creation place. And the story that we developed about these rocks formation is there was one time the animal people were called together. And they were told by the Creator, there's a great change coming. We need to be prepared for it. And when this great change comes, there also will be another change. Human beings are coming. But you people were here first. The human beings are coming. We need to be prepared for the coming of the human beings. Well, the human beings just happen to be Nez Perce. And so they were told to gather, and then they gather in a council. So that's the way they're sitting. They're sitting along this ridge line. And they were told, you come out and act the way you want to be and how you want to live, and then you will be given a name and you'll be qualified to help the human beings whenever they come. So each animal, fish, bird, and insect came out and did this. They told how they wanted to be, how they wanted to live, and how they wanted to act. And maybe even say, well, I can help the human in this way. Maybe if they can catch me, they can use my flesh for food. Or if they can catch me, they can use my hide for their clothing. And if they catch me, they can use my brain to soften the hide to make it for clothing. You know, those are kind of things. So as a young child, when you hear this story, you hear what you can do with the animal that you see, and you're able to acquire it and utilize it. This process is explained to you by your elders, so when it comes your time in your lifetime, you can acquire this animal and utilize it. And you know its name. Like Nacho, salmon. The salmon lives in rivers and he comes back every year, back up there. So you need to know when that salmon comes back to utilize it. And this is what the salmon is describing. He says, I can help the human being, but they'll have to catch me to devour my flesh. And they can boil my skin, and then they can use the residue from that boiling to make glue. So this is what you hear in this story. And all the insects, birds, fish, and animals were given his name, their name. You know, Hachats, grizzly bear, Yaha, black bear, Nachok, salmon, you know, and it goes on and on. So this story could go as long as the storyteller could remember those things that he knows. So I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version of this story and say, this is how we learn things. Did you have a question?
Yes, already just this show, I've got a couple of ahas that have come to me. And one seems to be that the white man imposed his form of leadership, or presumed the form of leadership that the Nez Perce had by, you know, looking for leaders, looking for headmen, et cetera, et cetera. What was actually the leadership look like within the Nez Perce at that time? How did it go up? In other words, how did you pay allegiance to your leader? How did you follow him? How did you get his authority? It's curious to me.
You know, actually, it was a democratic process. If you really practice a democratic process, you choose your leader by saying, yes, I will follow him, but I won't follow him. Because I know that this man here, he knows what to do and how to do it, and he knows when, because he has the experience. You know, he may have been out on the plains hunting buffalo, or he may be he's been salmon fisher, you know, all his life. So then he has a way to communicate well with other people. So he's chosen as a leader. Well, if he messes up on that leadership, they'll choose somebody else. A democratic process. And this democratic process is building consensus within a tribal group. Does the United States Congress do that now? I don't think so. But we would do that. When it operated perfectly, this democratic process and consensus building worked great. If you can stick to it. You know, and of course, and actually the word caucus comes from an eastern tribe. And this is what Congress does. They form a caucus to accomplish something. Well, it came from the eastern tribe because that's what they call it. It's also consensus building. And you vote, you know, just by, yeah, I will follow him. And you get a number of people to do the same thing, and he's a leader. But if that leader messes up, they'll choose somebody else.
And there were discussions on this. In other words, it was a political process.
Yeah, there would be a council. You know, if this was an important mission or an important event that had to be addressed, they would call the people together and say, this is, one of the people would say, well, this is what the problem is, this is what we need to do, how are we going to do it, and they would have this discussion. And they'd go around the circle and point, what is it? You talk. You get through talking and say, now you talk. So that was a discussion. And sometimes those prominent leaders would be pointed out because they had led a previous expedition or something, and they wanted his opinion. So some of the leaders would be readily pointed out. And so this consensus building is very important, and it has this full discussion. Our present federal government, our present tribal government, it's called the Nez Perce Tribal Executive Committee. They're chosen by individual votes. And we go into what we call a general council, where all the voting age members of the tribe come and assemble, and they present the issues to the leadership. There's 9 members of the Nez Perce Tribal Executive Committee. And 3 of them get elected every year. So it takes 3 years to change the makeup of 9 members. So there's no great big change right away. Some tribes do it this way, they only elect, if they have a 15-member tribal council, they elect all 15 at the same time. Well, sometimes that creates confusion and right away because you got 15 different opinions wanting to solve the same problem. But in this process, it takes us 3 years.
So that tribal organization grows up historically out of the Nez Perce culture?
Yeah, this is based on our practices before. The General Council Assembly, where the issues are discussed and leadership chosen. This is what we did in the old days.
Thank you. Hope I didn't break the train of thought.
Oh, that's all right.
Makes me wonder about women's roles and how they change through the years.
The women? Well, if you look at this pictures, it's labor intensive what they're doing. And look at some of the men in the pictures, they're just standing there. Why are they doing that? Well, the task of a woman was usually family-based and gathering foods and making clothing, and controlling the family group. The men, they were out hunting and fishing and protecting the tribal and family units. So their job was a little bit more dangerous than the women's roles. Well, this is kind of the trade-off. But then, and this is what we found when we wrote about Lewis and Clark, women had more power at the time of Lewis and Clark that was equal to the men. Did Lewis and Clark have that same equality among their women? Not at all. Women were property, just like land or other property. They never got the right to vote until, what was this, 18th or 19th Amendment in the Constitution. So it took them a lot longer. Well, Indian women, Nez Perce women, even though they were called judges by Lewis and Clark, they had more influence and power than some of the men. Because they practiced medicine just like the men did. They were healers. They were leaders. And sometimes roles were exchanged. There would be times when women actually fought. Most of the time, the women, when the man went to war and was fighting, the woman was right behind him, handling ammunition or food to him or water. She was out there right behind him. So that's how they got involved in combat. And some of them even picked up the weapon if their husband happened to be killed. And this happened at Big Hole. Walleye Tits and his wife. Walleye Tits was killed. Well, his wife picked up his weapon and shot the soldier that shot her husband. But then she was also quickly killed. Wallachit was my father's cousin. So women got involved in warfare that way. And there's other stories like that. One of the lawyers, one of his wives, before, I think it was at Prairie's Hole, some trappers were defending, fighting against some other people, other tribal people. And lawyer's wife went right behind him to assist him when he was fighting. And she had bullet holes in her dress. And of course it depends on a great deal on the individual woman. Well, even nowadays women are in combat. You know, you don't want to see that, but it's there now. But in the old days, you know, our women held the fighting as best they could. And women were good horsemanship also. You know, they broke horses like the men do. So those kinds of things are important. And of course, the women were the makers of all, you know, the leadscow, the hand-woven audit there, the case record. Most women made those. And then the beaded items over here, and the baby board, most women made those. Once in a while, a man might do that. Well, nowadays, because of changing times, men and women do the same thing. Men are weavers, men are bead workers, and so the role of man, woman in our tribe now is changed. They do each other's work sometimes. And I guess you'd call that better family arrangements, less fighting, and etc. But so this is part of that great change that we're talking about. We talked about this great change, you know, a couple hundred years ago, and we even prophesied. And this is general knowledge among all tribes. Other tribes spoke the same way. It would take us 5 generations to recover from the coming of the white man. 5 generations. Roughly 150 years. Well, in my estimation, we're into the 6th generation someplace. Because we are recovered, have recovered many things. And what that means is we are an economic and social force within our community and reservation. Principally because we have a casino. You know, other tribes in the Northwest also have casinos. So it's a good thing, but you know, we take advantage of whatever comes along. Yes?
Virginia, who was the docent here earlier, I guess she knows you, said you spoke of a trade language which was common across the country. Could you tell us about that?
The trade between tribes in the United States?
Well, apparently an Nez Perce could trade with another tribe using this particular language or
Oh, that's Chinook jargon. And actually it's a mixture of English, French, and tribal languages. So there's about only 500 to 600 words. And it's called Chinook jargon because it's a mixture of several languages. I'm trying to think of one. There's a word that I can't think of right off the bat, but skokum. Skokum means good. But it's a Chinook jargon. I don't know where it comes from, but skokum just means good.
So this is a new layer of communication.
Yeah, and it was probably developed probably during the trapper, when the traders and trappers came in, probably about 1820, 1830. They started using these different words. There were the French words and then English and then maybe even Russian and Spanish got in there because the Spanish were coming up the California coast and Russians were coming down from Alaska and Canadians were coming across. They were English and French. The same way from the East Coast, English, French, and German, Italian. You know, then of course, principally from the Gulf states is Spanish and Mexican. So you would have, somewhere in the middle of the United States, all these different peoples meet up and, well, how do you speak to one another? Sign language is one. But then verbal communication seems to be a way that just naturally occurs. Because a tribe may know some French words, know a few English words, because depending on which trader or missionary came out here first, we would learn portions of his language. And then someone later would come in, so there's a different... You know, the interesting thing, my father used to tell me this, he grew up speaking only Nez Perce. And he lived close to what is a little town on the reservation called Cul-de-sac. And that's a French word, cul-de-sac, and it just means box canyon. And he lived up on the upper rim of Cul-de-sac Canyon. But then the Dawes Act had been applied, and about this time he would have been about 1900, 1901, somewhere in that. He was probably 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years old, enough to pick up words and, you know, exchange words. Well, he had a French family that was his neighbors, where his mother and his uncle lived. And so he'd go play with the French kids who were about his same age. And he would say Nez Perce, and they would say French. And pretty soon they were talking mixed Nez Perce French between themselves. So he learned French from these French kids. Then he was taken away to the boarding school in Lapway. They come up and took him out of his mother's yard and put him in boarding school. And so that's the way he was introduced to education. Well, he told his mother, I don't like it, what they're doing to me down there. They won't let me speak my language, and I don't know English. And of course, he was conversing in Nez Perce. He was complaining to his mother about it. And so she told him, well, I'll see if I can get you out of that boarding school. Because it was run as a military school. They had to dress up in a uniform and march around, count the cadence. And they'd work half a day, then go to school half a day. And he was punished for speaking Nez Perce. So he complained about it, and then his mother said, well, I got you into the Catholic mission school up Mission Creek at Jacksburg, which is a few miles from Cul-de-sac. So she got him into that Catholic school, which Father Cataldo ran. And at this time, Father Cataldo was probably in his 90s, at least in his 80s. He was an old man. And so my dad went into this Catholic school. There was also a boarding school. And there was white students there as well as some Indians. Because Father Cataldo had translated the book of John into Nez Perce. And so Father Cataldo was very versed in Nez Perce. He could speak Nez Perce well. So he and Dad would talk in Nez Perce, and he wasn't being punished for it. So he liked that school. But he was a poor student, just like I was when I was a kid. Well, anyway, he was there probably a year or two, and he got the equivalent of probably a 3rd grade education. Then that being a Catholic school, the priest spoke in Latin. And he was an altar boy for the priest, so he picked up a little bit of Latin also. He spoke some Latin, French, a little bit of English, and Nez Perce. So he learned about 4 languages. Well, then World War I comes along. You know, he has to go in the register, you know, and get one of these registration cards. And I don't know whether he volunteered or got drafted. Probably doesn't really make a lot of difference because he was sent south, probably to California somewhere. And they called him out into formation. He was only there a couple of days. They lined him up there, and the sergeant started asking, who can count cadence? Well, my father, being in a military school at a young age, he raised his hand. He says, yeah, I can count cadence. Well, you stand right over there. Then somebody else, you know, would say, well, who can count cadence or speak French, because they knew where they were going. And so my father was chosen because he could count cadence. He would march people around. So within a couple of days, he was put on a train, sent east, issued a rifle, put on a ship, and ends up in France with no training, just a rifle. But then they put an MP label on him, and he went out, because he could speak a little bit of French, he was picking up American deserters in France. So that was his job. Simply because he could shoot a rifle. Of course, he grew up shooting a rifle anyway, hunting. And so he was an expert rifleman, so he didn't need training. He could shoot a rifle, so they made an MP out. Well, he was picking up deserters in France for a few months. Then towards the end of the war, they started running out of soldiers because millions and millions of soldiers were being killed in the trenches. Well, he was an MP. They said, well, you got to go in the trenches too. So they put him in the trenches, probably in Argonne Forest. That's where most of the American units were. They put him in a trench. And he was fighting trench warfare. He said, well, when he ran out of food, if there was a mule around, we'd kill it and eat it. If there's a horse around, we'd kill it and eat it. So that's how some of the food was very scarce, because you're feeding millions and millions of soldiers on a daily basis. So any kind of live animal that showed up got eaten. And so he would describe that to me. Then one day he said, I was sitting in a trench and a German gave me an extra buttonhole in my tunic. The bullet went right through his jacket there. He said, the Germans made me another buttonhole. So he darn near got killed. But he survived. But then the last few weeks of the war, took him back out of the trenches. You're going to be a guard. Again, go back into MPs. So he was a guard at Compiègne at the railroad car that the armistice was signed. And I've been looking for a picture to see if I could find him in that armistice negotiation. But I can't find him. They had pictures of generals and diplomats, and the railroad car, but not of him. But he always described that day to me, 11th hour, 11th month, and 11th hour. That's when the armistice was signed, because he was there. So he was kind of proud of that moment. He'd always talk about it. But he survived the war. He came back. Had a large family. I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters. But there's only 4 of us brothers left. I'm the youngest family member. And I'm barely pushing 79. Actually, I'm past 79. But my oldest brother is 92.
So, Alan, we probably shouldn't go on too much longer and maybe take a couple more questions. But I would like you to talk a little bit about family groups. Like you remember, I think it's on your mother's side that you're from Wallowa country?
Well,
and then how, for instance, we can maybe remember our grandparents. Very few of us remember the names of our great-grandparents. How far back and how, just say something about families, about you. There's a picture of teepees here. You were telling me a little bit of, that was probably a family grouping. So who would have been in, how many people would have been in each of those 20 teepees?
I'm a descendant of Hachatzel Hill, and he's from the Salmon River country.
Okay.
And that's Bloody Bear. The translation of Hachatzel Hill is, the literal translation is red grizzly bear. But that means that the red is blood on the grizzly bear. And the reason for that name is, and I trace that name back to about 1750 or 1760. And so I'm descended from Red Bear, who also met Lewis and Clark, probably the son of the original Red Bear. And
So that's 5, 6 generations then?
yeah, and how this occurred was that Red Bear met Lewis and Clark, and there's a Red Bear descendant of Lewis and Clark, or of William Clark.
Right.
His name is Halach Tilke. And I met descendants of William Clark. I kind of teased him. I said, "Oh, hi, brother-in-law." You know, they don't know what to say sometimes. So in reality, if you trace Indian heritage, you know, if you can go back that far, and that's about 4 generations ago, you know, I'm related to William Clark. Because William Clark had a son of one of the Red Bear women. And another way that we're related to Red Bear is that my mother, who is a Black Eagle married Red Bear. And the way I'm related to Chief Joseph and Matui is that the sister of Joseph married a Black Eagle who is my mother, from my mother's side. So I'm related to that portion of leadership of the old Red Bear clan, who were originally from the Salmon River area. And from my father's side, I'm related to 2 leaders, Chief Timothy and Chief Cutnose. Cutnose was at a village at the mouth of Potlatch Creek, just above Lewiston, Idaho. And Chief Timothy was on the El Poway Creek. And we're descended from that side through my father. And I'm also related to Looking Glass, because my mother was. So, and my mother's name was Wiantoin. My father's name was Kulkulkirunik. And my grandmother's name is Xana. And, the English name, Antonia was my mother's mother. I'm trying to think of her nest person, I can't think of it right now. But I traced that side from my mother to a lady that was called, the last name was Jack, Mary Jack. And the reason that, but I don't know it's from my mother's grandfather or my mother's grandmother. But I know that Mary Jack is, I'm descended from her. And the reason I know is that the early photographers came out during the gold rush in the 1860s. And because of the gold rush, they followed the gold rush people. And they started taking, photographers started taking pictures of Nez Perce people. And they're tintype photos. And I found a photo that my sister had, looking through her photo collection that she got from her mother. And I ran across this picture, this photo, tintype. It's on very thick paper. And this old elderly lady, so I turn it over and look on the back, and it says Mary Jack, grandmother of Antonia, my mother's mother. So that lineage goes back to 1860, somewhere in that area. But from my mother's side also, it goes back to about 1760, 1750.
But you've been,
The Red Bear.
but you're a historian in a way. Is the normal, do your Nez Perce neighbors, does everybody, can most people trace back 3 or 4 generations, names and relationships? Is that common, do you think?
Unfortunately, no.
It is not.
Because of the changes that we've gone through, educational principally, is that, you know, you go to public school, and of course the dominant language is English.
Mhm.
You know, we weren't allowed, when I was at school, we weren't allowed to speak Nez Perce. And so we made no big issue of it. And so we got along pretty well with most people. But some families, because they became Christian Nespers, they were told, don't take up the old ways. And that meant looking at your ancestry and describing the events of your family of 2 and 3 generations ago. They said, that's heathenism. You cannot do that anymore.
Okay.
So some of our families lost their connection to their past simply because they were told not to talk about it. But nowadays, everybody in my tribe wants to know their ancestry. And sometimes they can't find it, sometimes they can. And
Does intermarrying with Caucasians make you a break? By many white people didn't you get breaks in your family lineage that way, or name?
yeah, actually the principal destroyer of Indian names was the Daza. My grandfather, when he was being registered for the Dawes Act, which means that he was to occupy a portion of land, 60 acres or 120 acres, to settle on and build an improvement on. Well, he was told, if you don't choose an English name, we'll give you one. And they will write it in a book, along with the land description that he was supposed to acquire. And he knew of Pinkham. There was a state sheriff in Minnesota County that was named Pinkham. And he said, call me Pinkham. So that's how we became Pinkhams, because of the Dawes Act. And some of our people followed it and said, oh yeah, that's why we got this person named like Smith and Johnson and McCormick and et cetera, common English names. But others said no. And part of this is part of the Red Bear situation. One of my ancestors, he was called Red Bear because he was descended from the original Red Bear of Lewis and Clark. And so he would call himself that. He says, I'm Red Bear. He says, no, you've got to have an English name. You've got to choose an English name. So somebody said, well, you could be called George. All right, call me George. Well, you got to have another name too, a first name. He says, well, Amos. So he became known as Amos George in English. But he went back to using the Red Bear name, and he was told, no, you've got to accept this white man's name. So he said, to compromise, he said, call me Amos Bear. Or call me Amos Red Bear. And he says, no, you got to drop it all. So he said, oh, okay, he says, call me Amos George. And sometimes he'd call himself George Amos. Because to him it didn't matter, because it's still his name. Either George Amos or Amos George are the same thing to him. Because that's the way our names went also. And so, and I found some written records of what was then Amos George, but I knew he was Red Bear. But I knew who he was. He was an ancestor to my mother. And we lived on the original Red Bear allotment of 1893. Well, actually about 1895, but I live on this allotment. That was originally a Red Bear allotment. Right next to it. My 2 other brothers also have, the 2 sisters of Red Bear had 2 other allotments, and my 2 other brothers live on those allotments. So we're still connected to the Red Bear. And a lot of our people have lost this ability to connect to their ancestors. And a lot of them want to know. Because hopefully now there's no restriction on who you can call yourself. And I just went through a ceremony here just last weekend. I had a grandson and a great-grandnephew who wanted Indian names. And about 4 other people said, well, we want Indian names too. So we lined up all these kids and put them through a ceremony where we gave them a Nez Perce name. So naming in Nez Perce is coming back. My son, Josiah, this man that's on the inside of this board, his name Josiah Red Wolf. He's there with the dip nets fishing. And he's standing next to Ralph, Jim, and they have a salmon. Well, I knew those guys. I know Josiah Red Wolf and I knew Ralph Jim when they were on. And so these boys, and their parents wanted to have Nez Perce names. So we lined them up and they chose a Nez Perce name. And so we went through the ceremony of giving each one a Nez Perce name. And they were supposed to give out gifts as payment for receiving that name. So we went through this ceremony, and they were standing on a blanket, usually a penitent blanket. They also had to give that away for their name. Very few of Nez Perce have done this probably since 1940s and 50s, but now it's coming back. And this is this great change that I'm talking about. Just like the large animal people became small animal people. We're doing something similar, but it's in a tribal organization and families and our beliefs that we're bringing back. And some will have a little bit of problem with this because, well, our Christian teaching tells us to do certain things. And we shouldn't do certain things as Indian people. Well, some are ignoring that completely, which I feel very, very good about, because what this really is identifying yourself as a human being, or identifying yourself as Ninepu, Suknipilu, people. We're just identifying ourselves, that's all. And some are finding that they can commit to being members of this dominant society even though they act different or do things differently. They can still participate in the social and economic realm of the dominant society. It took me a long time to adjust to that, but I did. And one of the things that I accepted is that I would not consume alcohol anymore. And that was part of it. About 40 years ago, I said, that's a crutch. Why do I need it? So I just quit using alcohol. And I didn't smoke. So I thought that was a benefit. And I think more people that do this, you know, just realizing your own self-identity and a purpose that you're here for, you just need to accept it, participate in a community, and hopefully you'll become a good member of this society.
So Alan, take one more question, and then we do have some of the Lewis and Clark books over there, and they're already signed, but you can sign them again or something. And there are other books about Nez Perce here, and also, if you have any comments on any of the exhibit or anything, we'd sure like to hear it. And of course, we got a grant from the Wheeler Foundation, which helps to bring Alan here, and some other activities that are going to happen this month. But we will, of course, appreciate any donations. So with that, take another question, and then maybe stick around for a little bit of...
Yeah, and I'll stick around here if you have any specific question about any of the photos. Yes?
I just have a question about today, how do you have any plans for preservation of the language, your traditions, and song? Are these things passed on orally, to oral tradition, or written, or recordings?
She's asking about how do we pass on knowledge and language and even educating our own people, you know, and bringing the language back. We're doing that. We have a program within the local school districts in Kamai, Orfino, and Lapway, where we're actually teaching Nez Perce to school kids in public school. We have never been able to do that, before. But now we're doing it. The principal and superintendent of the Lapway School District is the Nez Perce. And she's changing things because she realizes that restoring language and cultural practices is important for the school kids. Now, back in the 40s, the Lapway School District was dominantly white students. Now it's a reserve. The Nez Perce are the dominant in the school district. We outnumber the whites. So now we're learning our own culture in the school, the language principally, and then also LCSC in Lewiston, local college, they have a language course also. And you can get credit for learning Nez Perce as a foreign language. And just recently, I got contacted by a couple of professors at LCSC, and they want to develop a curriculum for Nez Perce perspective on environmental issues and natural resources and economy even. So I said, yeah, I'll help. So this has never been done through. Other tribes have done it, but we haven't gotten around to it. University of Idaho is also doing the same thing. They want to develop a curriculum that reflects tribal sociological practices, maybe even some economies. So we're getting there in the high school level, grade school, high school, and college level. Now they're interested in environmental aspects of tribal cultures also, because that now is becoming important. Environmental issues are very important. People say, well, there's no global warming. Why should we worry about it? Oh, really? I was in Alaska in the 1960s. I have a brother up there. He moved to Alaska after World War II. He was in the Navy. And he liked Alaska, so he said, well, I'm coming back to Alaska. Of course, wide open spaces, and that's what he liked. And big, tall mountains. He said, when he got to Alaska, he says, these mountains are higher than the ones in Idaho. I'm coming back. So he went back. And he's still up there. He's 92 years old. And so he likes Alaska, so he stays. He's in a nursing home now, but he lived up there for about 60 years. Married up there. He's a widower now, but nonetheless, the Nez Perces come back to the reservation, except my oldest brother. He decided to stay. My other brothers went off reservation, and I went off reservation when we were young men. But now I've got two brothers and myself who live on the reservation now, and one brother in Alaska. And we went work, off reservation, California, Washington, Oregon, worked at different places, but we all came back to Lapway. Because that's where we identify ourselves as a family. And we practice our culture, just like this naming ceremony that we went through last weekend. Those naming ceremonies hasn't been done for a long, long time. I was given my name at a tribal gathering, but I was so young, I was probably about three years old, and my dad told me what he did to give me a name. He just gathered the people and says, this boy is going to be called Pakahaikate. And I assumed he gave out gifts for my name. But he just told me, he says, yeah, I gave you my name in front of the people. So that's how I received my name. And the language is becoming important, so we have to reteach that to our younger people, because some of the parents and grandparents lost the ability to speak Nez Perce. I'm not fluent in Nez Perce myself, but my older brothers and sisters were, because they grew up with our grandparents. And our grandparents, they didn't want to speak English. They only talked in Nez Perce. So my older brothers and sisters, they had to learn Nez Perce whether they wanted to or not. And my grandmother grandmother. But unfortunately, when we came of age, there were about 4 of us, the younger ones. The grandmothers and grandfathers weren't around. So and then my father and mother were told, don't speak Nez Perce to your kids. That's what they were told. So they kind of shut down. And my mother was speaking to me in Nez Perce one time, and I was talking back to her. She said, oh, now you what she was saying was, you sound like a white man. When I was speaking Nez Perce. Because the accent wasn't, I had that accent of the English tone. So, but now, it's also happening now because some of the elders are complaining, well, you're not teaching the right Nez Perce. And that's true because the speakers of Nez Perce now learn it from books and recordings. You don't get that inflection of the accent. And one little change in a sound means something different with the same word. And that's what's happening. And they complain about it, but then we have several learned speakers of Nez Perce in our community. They're actually teaching young kids in school how to speak Nez Perce. So that's good. That's a good thing. And then the cultural practice is also coming about. They don't do these old things the way some of these ladies are doing, but they do the weaving and beading. And some of our tribal people, both men and women, do fantastic work with beads and weaving. Even Ida Blackie, who was my aunt, she has a bag here, a cornhusk bag. She always did beautiful work. So one of my daughters now does very similar work. And same way with the beads. I have another daughter. She beads whole regalia. And she just does it in a few months. She's very, very good with her hands, and she shows very well. And she's a curator for the Spokane, or Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture in Spokane, for the Indian material in the museum. And so she really enjoys that work, but she's also a fantastic bead worker also. And I'm pretty proud of my family. There are 2 of them are working in museum and curatorial materials in museums. My 2 daughters, and then I have my 4 sons are doing the similar work. One is a cultural leader in the tribal program with the tribe now. And I have 2 other sons, Timothy and Alan Jr., who are fantastic bead workers and painters.
And canoe builders pretty soon.
Yeah, and I don't have all these talents that my children have, but all I'm good at is talking.
Well, thank you very much.